Nisha Mohta, and as you all know, I'm back here with my mother. I think she's by now a familiar face for all of you. Let's start with our chess lessons. And what are we learning today? So today we will learn a special move of the king, which is called castling. Mom, do you know what castling is? Do you know it?
Yes.
You know it, yes? So, okay, let me get the position of castling. But before that, what happens in castling? Can you explain?
First, touch the king.
Okay, you
and
touch
put,
the king.
And put in the...
2 squares away.
Yes, and rook put in...
Next to it.
Next.
Okay, good. What mom says is correct. I will try to show that with the help of an example. So, let's try to make a few opening moves. E4, E5, knight F3, knight C6, bishop C4, bishop C5. Now in this position, normally what we know that a king takes baby steps. So till now what we have learned is king can move one square to E2 or F1. This is what we learned till now, right? I mean, we have not covered castling yet. So
G1.
Yes, so mom says there is another way to put the king in this position, and that is put the king on G1. Now the first question is, how is that possible? Because till now what we learned is that the king moves only one square, right? But this is a special move of the king and it's called castling. So what happens in this is the king moves from E1 to G1. And like this is one way of casting. This is called short castle, in which the king moves from E1 to G1 and the rook from H1. Where does it go to, mom? Which square can you tell me?
E1.
It goes
H1 to E1.
H1 to E1? You sure? It goes 2 squares away from the king, or it's next to the king?
King come to G1.
Yes, king comes to G1. That's correct.
And rook come to F1.
F1. The rook goes to F1. So let me do it. There are too many colors. It could be little confusing. Let me make the move. So the king I'm putting to G1 and the rook comes to F1. Now what is this? Yes, this is castling, right?
Yes.
This is a special move in chess. It's called castling, and in this the king has moved 2 steps at a time, not one baby steps like what we learned, right? Okay, now let me tell you a few things about castling. It's the only move in the game of chess where 2 pieces move at the same time. There is no other move in which 2 pieces of the same player moves at the same time. So here the king moves to G1 and the rook comes to next to the king. Yes. So it's to F1. So remember this, the king moves 2 steps here, right? Yes. And from E1 it can only go to G1 for short castle. Yes. There is another long castle which I will show later, but about short castle, this you need to know that the king from E1 goes to G1 and the rook from H1 comes to F1, right? Yes. This is short castles. Now, when can you castle? So, for example, let me ask mom a question. Suppose white plays a move, a very odd looking move, king F1. Black moves knight F6. And suppose D3, black has played. This is black has used the right to castle. He moves his king 2 squares from E8 to G8. It's possible, mom?
Yes.
Yes. So black moves his king 2 squares from E8 to G8 and the rook comes next to the king. Remember, castling is possible only with the king and the rook, right?
Yes.
So now suppose the king comes back to E1 and say black makes a move D6. Mom, question to you. Can white castle now?
Yes.
White can castle now?
Why not?
White cannot castle now.
Why?
Because this is one of the situations when you cannot castle. We saw in the previous 2 moves that white had moved the king. So white had played king from e1 to f1, and after knight f6, d3, castles, white came back to e1. So the first rule of castling is the king should not have moved from its original square.
अच्छा.
So if a person moves the king from its original square and then brings it back, you cannot castle.
अच्छा.
So for the king to castle, the king shouldn't have moved from its original square. Now, one more thing. Let's make a few moves. Let's go to the start position. So e4, e5. I'm just making few random moves. Knight f3, knight c6, bishop c4, bishop c5. Suppose white makes the move rook g1. Suppose it's a very odd looking move, but suppose white makes this move. Black goes knight f6. White sees this pawn is in danger. He goes d3. Say black plays something like d6. White goes... I'm just showing this fast because this is not what I want to explain. I want to get to the position. So suppose this is the position. Can white castle now?
Yes, but rook is change the
Yes.
square.
You cannot castle. I mean, it's the same with the rook. So the rook shouldn't have moved from its original square. From, like, you know, when you want to castle, the rook should be where it belongs and shouldn't have made a move prior to castling. So here the white king cannot castle. It's not possible to castle here. So very important rule of castling is the king from e1 and the rook on h1, they shouldn't have made a move. If they have moved from their original position and come back to e1 or h1, you cannot castle, right? You get it? Okay, now let's come back to the start position again. Say I make the move e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop c4, knight f6 suppose. White supports the e4 pawn which was under attack, and black goes bishop b4 check. Mom, can you tell me, is it possible to castle when a king is in a check?
Yes.
No.
Why?
You cannot castle when your king is in a check.
Oh, अच्छा.
Castling is not possible in the exact same move when your king is in a check. The bishop from b4 is attacking the king on e1, right?
Yes.
It's giving a check to the king. This move, white cannot go king from e1 to g1 and say I'm castling.
Yes,
No,
ma'am.
it's not possible. You have to first defend your king from the check, somehow cover the check, maybe c3. You attack the bishop moves, and now white can castle.
अच्छा.
So castling is possible in this situation after you have covered the check, but remember a very important rule of castling is you cannot castle when your king is in check. Clear? Okay, let me try to make let me try to move a bit forward. So c3, say bishop a5. I'm just making a few random moves to get to some position. So suppose b3, a6, bishop a3. Just a few random moves. These are not the best moves, but of course I'm trying to get a position. Now the question is, can black castle now or not?
कैसलिंग कर सकते हैं.
It seems that black can castle, but again this is a situation when the black king cannot castle. Do you know why? Because the f8 square, which is, you know, the path for the king, is controlled by the bishop on a3, and the bishop blocks the f8 square. So
Oh, अच्छा.
black cannot castle, which brings us to one more exceptions, like one more position where you cannot castle is if the king's path from e8 to g8 is controlled by any of the enemy pieces, you cannot castle. Okay, so suppose if black plays d6 now,
Then.
white can castle, and now this bishop no longer controls f8, right?
Then black can be castle.
Yes, so now black can castle and this is normal. Remember one thing, in short, this what I'm showing you right now is called short castle. In short castle, the king goes 2 steps towards the h1 or the h8 rook. For white, it's the h1 rook. For black, it's the h8 rook. That's called short castling. The king goes 2 steps and the rook comes from its initial position right next to the king. It's clear?
Yes.
Okay, let me show one more form of castling. So let me try to make a few different moves. Say e4, c5. This is called the Sicilian defense, but we don't need to learn the openings right now. So let's try to make a few moves. Say d6, d4, cd4, knight d4, knight f6, knight c3, a6. I'm just trying to play a few moves. You don't have to understand this, so I'm not explaining this. Just a few random moves to bring a position. So suppose this is a position. Let me try to bring it further here. Now this is a situation when white can castle, we know, from e1 to g1, right?
Yes.
Now there's another way white can castle here, and that is called long castle.
Yes. B1.
Not b1. It's always 2 steps for the king in castling. So from e1 you go to c1 and the rook from a1 comes to d1. Okay, too many arrows, it's a little difficult. So rook from a1, it comes to d1 and king from e1 goes to c1,
C1.
right? And as mom mentioned at the start, that in case of castling you have to touch the king first. You cannot touch the rook. So while making the move of castling, you have to touch your king, bring it 2 steps and the rook next. So king, you first bring it to c1 and then touch the rook and bring to d1. This is called long castling. Again, remember one thing, the rule is same. The king moves only 2 steps. Now this time to the queen side, to the other side of the board. And again, you need to keep in mind that the king shouldn't have moved from its original square. And if you want to castle long with the a1 rook, then the a1 rook shouldn't have moved from its original square. If you want to castle with the h1 rook, then the h1 rook shouldn't have moved from its original square. So for short castle, the king goes from e1 to g1 and the rook comes to f1 next to the king. For long castle, the king goes from e1 to c1 and the a1 rook comes next to the king. Remember one thing, if the king's path is blocked, then the side whose king's path is blocked cannot castle. Like we saw in the last example, the bishop was on a3, it was controlling f8 and we could not castle. In the last example, I can try to bring a very random position to try to explain. So let me try to make some very random moves. They are not like extremely good moves, but for example, if the knight is here, obviously nobody will play any other move but remove the queen. But suppose this is a position. Now the king can obviously not come to c1 because the knight is controlling that square, right?
Yes.
So you cannot play castles now. The king cannot go to any square controlled by the enemy's piece. So castling is not possible now. I mean, long castling is not possible now. You can of course go short castles here, right? So this is all about castling. Let me repeat once more from the start. In case of castling, let me just bring a position. For example, say something like maybe something like say here. Okay, so for castling, number 1, some things which you need to remember. It's a special move of the king. It's possible if the king has not moved at all in the game prior to castling. It's possible if the rook with which the king is going to castle has not moved earlier in the game. If it's the h1 rook, this rook shouldn't have moved from its original position. If it's the a1 rook, this rook shouldn't have moved from its original position. king cannot castle when it is in check. Exactly the same move it cannot castle. And the king cannot castle if somebody, some piece of opponent, for example, say here, for example here, say if I make a move like f3, knight h5, h3, knight g3. Here the king cannot castle short because this knight is controlling the f1 square. It's the path of the king to g1. So the white king cannot castle short here. If it has to castle right now, it can castle long castle with king on c1, rook on d1, right? So this is all about castling. This is all you need to know. It's a special move, and it's normally used in most of the master games. Remember 2 squares of the king to the left or to the right. Clear? Okay, so good for today. I will see you in the next clip.